Hey, how y'all doing? This is Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about the Broken Skull sessions with Drew McIntyre. Speaking of Stone Cold Steve Austin, so spoiler, I like Drew McIntyre as a performer. I think he's really good. Don't find him as interesting as a person though. I think that as a personality, he's very subdued. Like I like his the way he approaches the business. I like his approach to to um, to performing, his philosophy and things like that. I just don't think he's that interesting of a person. Like he doesn't have any. Like probably has crazy stories that he rather would not share, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of stuff that goes on that he can't talk about or wouldn't talk about. But his story is far more interesting than he is. So, but I thought this was very interesting. So I sat down and I watched it. It was an hour and a half, which was like, ooh, I didn't even get through the whole thing, if I'm being honest. I watched like a hour and 15 minutes of it, maybe. I think I got the gist of it. So, but I was really interested in his story, his backstory. So we get into the backstory, which he says he started wrestling at 15, and he had no plans of doing anything else, which is kind of part of why I don't see him as being an interesting personality. Like I think sometimes these guys they're so singularly focused on wrestling that he has genuine other interests, but it's like sometimes like you see like what was this Adrian Street when he's like a coal miner. Like that's interesting as fuck. Like I talked about the sommelier who was a Crip who then went to join Cirque du Soleil, and then he became a wrestler. It's like, wow, those are like interesting people. Like Drew McIntyre was like, at 15, I decided to want to be a wrestler, so I did it. And it was like, okay, like it's that simple, huh? Like we just decided as a teenager that we're going to be a wrestler, and then we just never deviated from that. We never did anything else. But his story as a wrestler is still very interesting, though. So he says it was only 2 wrestling schools in all of England, and then he went to one of them. I believe he said it was on the other side of the country or whatever. And he said he had 9 days of personal training, which was before, in about 8 or 9 months before his first match. And you know about help, various adults, put the rings together, book the talent for him, all that type of stuff, because they had like makeshift a makeshift promotion. Now, I did like that they had a lot of pictures of him as a youth. Like, they had pictures of him with Yokozuna when he was like 13, pictures of him and Steve Austin, with Steve Austin's sheet set, with the comforter and everything. I was like, oh my God. And it's like, it wasn't until recently that we really started seeing how mark-ish the wrestlers were. When you started seeing like pictures of Kevin Owens in a Y2J shirt, and now you see Drew McIntyre under the, it's like they have 100 pictures of these guys being fans before they were wrestlers, and to some degree that's cool. Another degree is like, well, it's cool because it's like there's kids out there who are doing the same thing. There's kids out there that probably be wearing a Drew McIntyre shirt, and in 15 years they're going to be sitting there, maybe not talking to Steve Austin, maybe talking to somebody else, and we're like, oh yeah, I was a huge fan of Drew McIntyre as a kid. I was a huge fan of so and so as a kid, and it's like, I get that, but we didn't have that when it came to like Ric Flair. Like nobody knew who Ric Flair's favorite wrestler was until like later in his life. Like nobody, I don't think anybody thought to ask, because who was going to ask him? Like oh, Rick, who was your favorite wrestler growing up? Like, there's no pictures of, well, because there was no merchandise. So it wasn't like Ric Flair could walk around with like a Ray Stevens jacket or something like that. But now in today's, merchandising world, a lot of the wrestlers are turning into, they're super fans at first, and then they turn their dedication into what they become. And I think it's kind of cool. It's also kind of markish, because I didn't have that stuff. I never had a ton of wrestling merchandise. At most, I would have posters and cards. And I went through the cards already when I on this channel before. I'm gonna get some more soon. But I went, but I never had like the sheet set. I never really had T-shirts. I never really had that stuff. I had the magazines though. Like I did have like a ton of Raw magazines and WCW magazines and stuff like that. But those were kayfabe magazines. Like I didn't think to buy the Observer or anything like that, because I didn't care about that shit. Why would I want to hear about somebody telling me that it's not real? I want to live in the world. It's like, would you rather read Harry Potter or read somebody tell you Harry Potter is not real? It's like, get the fuck out of here. I already know it's not real. What the hell? If I can read, then I know it's not real. Anyway, so he said that the adults helped them put together the rings and different stuff like that, and then they would bring in he didn't say washed up, but he said guys who were still working gigs, but they were former WWF guys like the Barbarian, like Marty Jannetty and Jake the Snake Roberts. So, and basically said that Jake Roberts pointed him out and said that he might make it, and but didn't elaborate and didn't spend any time on it. Just said he might make it and moved on. And then he talked about his relationship with Sheamus, and this is what I really liked because we don't know a lot about Sheamus either. Like WWE doesn't really dig into the backstories of these guys as much as they used to. Like they used to be able to tell, they used to tell these stories about these guys. Like they had these sit downs with Foley, or they would have these sit downs with Shawn, and they would talk about how, the training with Jose Lothario, or how Foley, saw Superfly Jimmy Snuka jump off the top of the cage. And that stuff would be on Raw where everybody could see it. It's like not everybody's interested in a sit-down podcast with Steve Austin. It's like you could bring this stuff to Raw. I said this before when I talked about the Keith Lee thing, right? That you have to really be a fan to sit down and watch a 40-minute thing just about him. Or to watch an hour and a half podcast just about Drew McIntyre. You have to really be a super fan of Drew McIntyre. Instead, just take the interesting bits and put them on Raw in like a short segment with him sitting down with Michael Cole or Corey Graves or something like that, talking about his backstory with Sheamus. That would have been very interesting TV. It was still interesting here though. Like he talked about he met Sheamus in Ireland, and they worked together first. And they kind of became fast friends. Started watching. They both were friends of Bret Hart, so they started watching Bret Hart's matches and breaking them down and different things like that. And next, they were best buds. So then he says like Sheamus' dad was a bodybuilder, and that helped him with working out and diet. And Sheamus had the connections to get into WWE. He had I guess he had who was I think he said Johnny Ace was head of talent relations at the time, and that the two of them had a workout. He did a workout in front of WWF talents. At the time, Undertaker was there, but Johnny Ace wasn't. And that they were told by Steve Keirn that if anybody was there to sign them, they would be signed. But since nobody was there, they had to wait 6 months. So then he tells this actually funny story about after being told nobody was there to sign them and to come back in 6 months. He and Sheamus went out and lied about being WWE superstars, and they told bouncers at the club that they were superstars and that people should look out for them. So they got like a VIP spot and everything. And then he says that a drunk Bobby Lashley showed up and started busting their balls about lying. And I thought that was really funny because I didn't see Bobby Lashley being like, that was so random. Like Lashley of all people, like busted you. But he said that, no, it was no big deal. And he said, of course, they got signed by Johnny Ace 6 months later. He told the story in a very interesting way when he says Johnny Ace gave him the voice, or basically like, well, I'm thinking about signing you. And then Drew McIntyre says, well, I'm thinking about letting you. So I thought that was funny because it actually, the one lesson that I learned through this whole thing is that Drew McIntyre has had things pretty easy. And because he had things pretty easy up to a point, he kind of started to crack under the pressure. And I like that. That's actually something I found very, very interesting was that story, but we'll get there in a moment. So he says he was sent to OVW to train under Al Snow. He says he did a workout, a promo. The writers came in. They were looking at somebody else, but he had impressed them. And he was only in OVW for a week before Howard Finkel called him and told him that he was being called up. And, even though he was 6 weeks, 6 months, it was 6 years, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Even though he was 6 years into the business, he was only 1 year into developmental. And, he still didn't really know what he was doing. He was brought up to SmackDown with Dave Taylor. And he said he came up with no seasoning, or he didn't really have any confidence either. This was, I think this was the Drew Galloway days, right before he got his name. And, he didn't really know how to work a hard camera. And this was very interesting right here, too, because Steve Austin said, like, he never worked the hard cameras. He just assumed that Kevin Dunn and all those people would just find the right shot. He just went and did what he was supposed to. He just worked his match. And now, it's up to the camera guys to do the camera guy stuff. But now they're training these people to work the cameras, which is very interesting. Like that's why Steve Austin and people like him are very important. Like they show you the gaps in how people have been trained in the past versus, because Steve Austin was trained for house shows, right? Like wrestling used to be you do TV in order to build to the house show. The house show was the money. So if you watch like the old TV shows, like World Class or Mid-South or Mid-Atlantic or something like that, you will often see big changes happening non-televised. Like a guy would come back with a belt. You'd be like, who the fuck is this guy? And why do he got a belt? And then you would figure out like, oh yeah, this guy won the title on a Wednesday night in the middle of nowhere. First guy just came into the territory. He's already the champion. And it's like, huh? Who? Like where does this guy come from? But that's how the territories used to do it. They used to build to house show matches. They would work the loops. Bill Watts, when he did his last Stampede, it was a house show loop. What he did with, I believe it was against the Midnight Express? I believe it was. And then when he did the Midnight Rider thing, I forget who that was against. But they didn't build things for television. Television was a way to support the live shows. That's how it always was until the WWF decided that pay-per-views and the big shows, and WCW too, because they had Starrcade, but the big shows were not just launching pads to the house show loop, but that the house show loops and TV and everything were supposed to support pay-per-views. And then, of course, over time, WWE just decided that house shows was a way to just do different things. That, we're gonna bring this to TV eventually, but first we're gonna do it on the house show loop. So the nature of house shows has changed a lot, and it also changed how people worked, because Steve Austin, was wrestling in the '80s, in the late '80s, but it was the '80s, and basically that the idea that TV was supposed to support the house shows was a major thing. So he didn't have to worry about working cameras. But as TV became more important, guys started being trained to work the cameras because you're on television. So that's very interesting. I saw somebody make a comment about that. Like, it takes 5 years for guys to learn that in NXT now. It's like, well, they don't learn that in 5 years now. It's basically, part of that is learning how to work cameras and different things like that. And then there's other aspects of it. But, he said he got sent to FCW, where he got some more seasoning, and then that's where he met Dr. Tom Pritchard, and then Steve Austin talked about being mentored by Dr. Tom. Dr. Tom Pritchard, his name floats around everywhere. Like he's one of those guys that if you show somebody a picture of him, they wouldn't be able to tell you who he is, but he's got his fingers in just about every pie, and he's helped train so many top guys and mentored them and gave them advice, but so many people just have no idea who he is. like they just probably know he's Bruce's brother, and that's it. And it's crazy that Bruce is the most known of the two, because Bruce is Bruce. Anyway, so they start talking about his actual on-screen role. The Chosen One situation with Vince McMahon, which took place September the 25th, 2009 in Oklahoma. A big market in Oklahoma. And he was announced as a future world champion by Vincent McMahon himself. And they shook hands. And this is when I noticed that how Drew McIntyre looks wildly different now than he used to. Not just because he's older, but his hair is brown. And I didn't really think about that before. Like he started dyeing his hair black. And I was like, why does he look so different? It's like, it's not just that he's younger, but he's also much bigger now than he was. But it was because he started dyeing his hair, and I guess he dyes his beard as well. But he basically says that after Vince McMahon did this whole thing with him being a top guy or being a future world champion, that Steve Austin said, like, this has to put a lot of pressure on you, and this put a target on your back in the locker room, because there was a lot of people who were jealous. And McIntyre was kind of like, yeah, but when I worked in Europe, I was always on top. When I came to the WWE's developmental, I was there a week. Everybody said I was so good that they brought me up in a week. Like this didn't give me as much pressure as you think. And in fact, he said he was quite cocky about it. Like he kind of expected it. Like, yeah, I expect things to be given to me pretty early because I'm so good. And this is one of the things actually got very interesting because it showed that he was being privileged. Yeah, he was showing that he didn't recognize it when he had it until they took it from him. But he had always been on top. He had always worked on top, and then he even worked on top after he left. So the actual idea of having to grind from the bottom was something that he had to learn. But we'll get there in a moment. So they showed some promo class footage from the show where he made Vince McMahon flinch, and it's amazing that they had promo class even in 2009. Like, I wonder how long they've been doing promo class. Like, how long have they been doing that? They've been doing it for a long time. But he said something that was very interesting, and he gave some people some advice. He says a match is a promo, and a promo is a match. You have to think of them as the same thing. And when I said that, I paused it. When he said that, I paused it, and I put some thought into it. And I said to myself, if you think about them as the same thing, they both are trying to accomplish the same thing. You're trying to get over yourself, and get over the opponent, get over the match. Where's the money, right? So you do kind of, if you look at them from that perspective, I get it. But he talked a lot about, what goes on in promo class, stays in promo class. But this was a famous clip because he threatened to throw a water bottle at Vince and got him to flinch, which was great. And to continue his privilege, and this is actually where the spiraling downside began, is he talked about having Undertaker as a mentor. That, Vince McMahon wanted him to succeed so badly that he gave him Undertaker as a mentor. And then he says that likely, and he was told by Shawn Michaels, that it was supposed to be Drew McIntyre and Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. But he pretty much botched it. He fucked it up. And this was when stuff really got good. Now, I really wish they would have spent more time on this. Why things went wrong. They kind of glossed over it when he's talking about, it's personal stuff. Oh, my mom was sick. Oh, started drinking a lot. And, yeah, things just kind of out of control. And I was like, yeah, but, like, what specifically went wrong? Like, there had to be something specifically went wrong. And he says that, Undertaker will always tell him that he needs to start being the wrestler and stop playing wrestler. And he said it took him forever to understand what that meant. And he started talking about, having confidence, slowing down, less is more, controlling the audience, not letting the audience control you, not feeling the need to always be doing something, constantly moves. And then he said that also he ended up botching the WrestleMania 26 thing twice. Because for starters, he was supposed to be in the match with Undertaker. He botched it, and he ended up being put in the Money in the Bank. And then he was supposed to win that. But then when they told him that he was going to lose, his reaction wasn't what they wanted. So they decided to basically just bury him after that. And I was like, wow. Like, wow. So he says that for a while, he really didn't do much of anything. I think just 2010, 2011 was basically just him doing jobs. And he still got a couple of matches with Undertaker in, but never the big WrestleMania match that, maybe he should have had. And then I think also, this is one of those rare occasions where a guy got bumped and it actually ended up being for the best because he ended up, not only did he end up losing his Intercontinental Championship, or no, he lost the Money in the Bank, my bad. But he ended up losing his spot, but we got Shawn and Undertaker, which was Shawn's last match, which I think was probably the best for everybody. So then they talked about 3MB, and he said it was Vince McMahon's idea to sort of reward Heath Slater for doing such a good job putting over these legends that they were bringing in to have him put over, and that they wanted to see a different side of their personality. And he's talked about how the company had envisioned for all these guys who might have had musical or kind of themes going around, and Vince was like, no, Jinder and Drew McIntyre, I want to see a different side of their personality. And he talked about how, Jinder was fine with it, and Heath Slater was fine with it, but everybody was sort of concerned about how he would react because he was, being the problem child. And he said that he was all right with it. He just wanted to do something because he hadn't been doing anything. and that he couldn't be trusted to do anything else because he was out of control at the time. He said that, to be quite honest, he was unhappy doing 3MB, but felt like, he couldn't be trusted to do anything else. He wasn't in the right headspace for more responsibility. And then he would say, like, there was somebody who would say to him, like, why are you doing this stupid shit? You better than this. And then I've heard that was actually Brock Lesnar that had said that to him. He didn't say that in this documentary, but I mean, in this conversation, but I heard somewhere, I believe it might have been from Drew, that, when he was doing 3MB, it was actually Brock that was like, why are you doing this stupid shit? You could be doing so much better. And I wonder why he just didn't say that here. Like, why he just didn't say that it was Brock here that, it kind of gave him that kick in the ass that he should be doing so much better. And, but that was very interesting. And he says that, June 12th, 2014 is when he got fired. He said that, 3MB was doing very well, that they were booked up solid. It was getting over. They were doing everything as a comedy team. He had been in WWE for 8 years at this point, and that, he was surprised that he had gotten released. And then he felt like a failure. And he talked about how that was short-lived. Like, right after he got fired, he wallowed a little bit, and then he decided to change. He decided everything needed to change. So he decided to go back to Scotland and join ICW, and he came up with this mission statement, and he cut this 20-minute promo that they showed pieces of, and about him being the fucking business, and that he had to leave in order to recognize what he had as far as the privileges that he had, and how everybody tried to set him up for success, and that he fucked it up, and that he had to work again from the bottom. He had to work his way back up. And so he says that he decided that he was going to put independent wrestling on the map, and that he was going to work hard to put independent wrestling on the map. He talked about being fired, put a chip on his shoulder. And that's usually what the case. Whenever WB fires some guys, they get really upset about it. I mean, that's just the nature of getting fired from jobs. You're always going to be like, oh, you fired me? I'm going to show you what you should have had. But so that was very interesting. That, he decided to basically build indie wrestling. Now, I know a lot of people might be like, oh, well, he wasn't that important. It was like, during that time, I remember seeing Drew McIntyre, or Drew Galloway, as he was known, pretty much everywhere. He was everywhere. And he basically says that, that from 2014 to 2017, he was climbing his way back up, and he won about 7 different titles. He was carrying all these different promotions from Evolved and ICW. He was also the TNA champion. They even mentioned TNA. That he said he wanted to be the same person everywhere, so that people can know that he was, serious about not wanting to play different characters and different promotions, but wanting to be the same guy, have that, and build those bridges and build those connections everywhere, and so that was very interesting, and he said about, he wanted to lift everyone up, to lift up the companies and the performers and everything. And so then he says his mission statement was to show you what wrestling is all about. That was what he wanted to do, and that's what he felt like he did from 2014 to 2017. Then he said he wanted to go to Japan. When they say Japan, I'm guessing he means New Japan. I want to see why you would go to all Japan. And so he says that before he hopped on the plane to go to Japan, or made the phone call to go to Japan, he got a call from William Regal. And the call from William Regal is what led to him going to NXT. He said he had a 40-minute conversation with Triple H about, basically helping build the NXT brand. And he says, since, WWE has always been his goal, that's kind of where he wanted to go. And then he talked about going to NXT. And he says that he was not concerned. Steve Austin was like, well, weren't you concerned that all that time away, people would forget who you were? And he talked about, he was so busy that he didn't really think that much about it until he was sitting there and nobody had really harassed him or anything. So he's like, it wasn't until after he worked Evolve and did all this other stuff that he started thinking, like, maybe, people might not remember me. And, when they did remember him, then he figured, okay, yes, this is the hardcore audience that follows the indies. They know who I am. They know what I'm about. They know what's going on here. And then he talked about, after he made his debut, he started acting like any other NXT talent, that he wanted to be an NXT leader, And so he started harassing Shawn Michaels and showing up to promo class and doing basically everything that everyone else was doing. And he didn't want any special privileges. He wanted to work it and work his way up again. And I thought that was pretty good. And so they talked about before they went into his return and all that stuff. He talked about the formation of the Claymore kick, and he talked about how the Claymore actually came from the tight pants that he wore in 3MB. That because the pants were so tight, he was so worried about splitting them that he started kicking with two legs. And basically, it became a running kick with two legs. And he said he knocked himself out the first time he did it because he landed on his head. And then somebody in the back told him, like, hey, if you can do that without killing yourself, you might have a decent finish there. And so he said he worked on it and perfected it, and that's how the Claymore came to be. And Steve Austin basically said the same thing. Like, he got showed the Stone Cold Stunner by Michael Hayes. But he got into the habit of wearing tight shorts all the time. So he wouldn't be able to get his leg up to kick. So he would kick Vince McMahon in the balls like 100 times. So that was very interesting. And also, we talked about his return to Raw. And he said that when he was brought up, there was no conversation with Vince. That basically they didn't talk about the past. That it took he was on the roster a while. Before they started talking about the past, they just focused on the future. And so it was very interesting. And then from there, of course, they talked about him winning the title. They talked early about the importance of him winning the title. And basically, comes from the same. It was similar stuff from the documentary that that the WrestleMania where the world stood still, and how he was kind of upset that he felt like his moment was being ripped away because there was nobody there, there was no crowd there. But he says that hearing other people's stories about how they struggled during this time, that kind of put it in perspective for him. So it became more or less like it kind of put him back in a headspace of, you're privileged to be doing this, you're lucky to be doing this, and now you have the opportunity to give people some respite, even if it was just a short match. I think the match with Brock was probably 3 minutes, and that was it. So they did a lot of talking about his promo skills and different things like that, but I didn't find that stuff to be all that interesting. But I did like when he talked about breaking the fourth wall, and that he said that early in the pandemic, you had people cutting promos to imaginary fans, and that he didn't want to do that. So he started talking directly to the cameras, and he felt like other people started doing it when he started doing it. He said he wanted to be a leader in that way, that, it's weird talking to nobody. And I remember specifically Bayley and Sasha Banks were cutting promos to imaginary fans. They were even waiting for pauses. Like, that was so weird. And basically he's talking about, like, okay, I started, talking directly to the camera, and then other people, of course, started doing it. And then they showed clips of those old Raws, like back when the pandemic first started, and there was no sound whatsoever. Oh boy. Because WWE is not ROH, because it sounds super empty, because there's a lot of talking segments, and it's very, very rough, and I don't know how I survived that time. But the matches were fine. It was everything else on the show that was a problem, because it was empty gym shit. So, but that stuff was pretty good. And he started talking about the importance of being the guy, wanted to be a leader and different things like that. He's talking about being a leader on with Randy Orton, one of those things where they showed some really good Drew McIntyre promos that I think people kind of overlooked as far as how good they really were. Such as when he called Randy Orton a selfish prick in that one promo with it was Randy and Ric Flair, about how he could have. Randy was an experienced veteran. When he saw a young Drew McIntyre not living up to his potential, not doing the best that he could, saw him struggling. A kind word, just a little pick-me-up, could have changed the difference, could have changed everything. But Randy Orton didn't do that, because Randy Orton's a selfish prick. And basically he says that the story was mostly real, but it wasn't Randy Orton in that situation. He didn't say who it was. But I can see that Randy kind of it's fine to put that on Randy because everybody knows how Randy is, and that he gets a lot of input from his wife, who is not a wrestling fan at all. So that was interesting. He said about his wife. He needs to get input from people who are outside the bubble. And Austin actually said he feels like Drew McIntyre is the best promo in the business. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Now we have to go all the way back to the beginning to talk about what Drew McIntyre talked about being the champion. And he talked about how, being the champion was very important. That, the journey there is as important as winning it. And that, it's always been a dream, of course. And, the lineage of the title. Being the guy that, how he sat down and he didn't want any time off. He wanted to learn as much as he could about the company. It's all the various statistics and corporate jargon. He wanted to know all of it. So when he sat down with people to do media, he could ramble that stuff off the top of his head. And he actually did it, like right there, about, all the different metrics and things like that. He said he didn't want any time off. So when the company told him, like, we got downtime, he's like, why do I got downtime? Give me something to do. And Austin says his favorite, my favorite Austin line, when he talked about being the champion, he's like, it's a work, but it's a shoot. Because the trust is real, the responsibility is real. And, during this time, the trust and the responsibility of being a champion is very real. And Drew McIntyre says, yes, it is. And that, it's all about innovating and adapting and being able to do different things. And he also talked about the Drew and A stuff, which is his show on the network, where basically he gets an opportunity to talk to different people about different things. He talked about ghosts. He said, he's interested in ghosts and he's interested in, sharks and stuff like that. So he felt like a chance to sit down and do those kinds of things with other celebrities. They basically trying to turn him into Joe Rogan. They try to turn Drew McIntyre into Joe Rogan. But it was all good. I liked it overall. I liked learning his story. I didn't finish it. I just felt like, okay, I got the gist of it. I don't know what they possibly could have talked about that I didn't get. It probably wasn't nothing major. At least I hope it wasn't, because then this video will be like completely, I have to do it all over again, or at least tack on some part of it. But coming into this thing, I didn't think Drew McIntyre was that interesting, because I didn't really know that much about him. WWE does not give you any chance to connect with these guys usually, because they don't do sit-down interviews anymore. They don't really dig into the personalities and the psyches of these characters anymore. They just kind of have these stupid scripts. And and I'm not even anti-script. Like, a lot of people think that, oh, get rid of scripted promos. It's like, have you heard most wrestlers talk? Most wrestlers need scripts. Hell, like, you can't be... Look, the best promo in the history of the business was pretty much The Rock. And, well, one of the best promos. I'm not going to say the best. But you can't say that a lot of these guys did not pretty much put promos together as if they were scripted long before this. They just kind of were. Most of these guys did not freestyle a promo. They put these, and maybe they didn't write it down, but, whenever somebody says like freestyle promos or freestyle raps, no, that shit is usually pre-written or is preconceived, put together in a certain way, and then delivered in a certain way. But we do need for things to feel more natural, and I do believe that Drew McIntyre did bring that to the table. Is that his promos do feel very natural. They feel like him talking. So that's really good. I don't know if he's the best promo in the business. I don't know about that. But I do appreciate, I think his promo skills are underrated. But this was very enlightening as far as understanding his history with Sheamus, his winding road in the company. I really would have liked to know more about his life, as far as like when things started going wrong. I know he said his mom had cancer and he started, he didn't take that well, which, makes sense. That makes sense completely. But I think that nowadays they probably would have sent him home rather than just let him spiral out of control. I mean, 2009, 2010 was a big different time. They actually care more about people's mental health today than they did in the past. They probably would have given them like 6 months off nowadays, but back then it was like the grind, the machine never stopped. You have to go, 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 go. So it makes sense that he just couldn't keep up. And plus he was only like 24, 25 or something like that at the time. So it was tough. You know, I know it had to be tough for him. But that's it for this video, man. Thank you guys for listening. If you watched it, let me know what you thought of it. Like this video, share the video, subscribe to this channel, take the $1 challenge. I thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you guys later.